So I think I'm gonna leave D&D. Okay, hear me out. This was not intention. I wasn't really shopping around for other systems, but I like to keep my ear to the ground, like to keep my mind open. I came across a system during one of Mr. Rex's videos about a system called DC20 by Dungeon Coach. You may have heard of it. The Kickstarter just went live on the 4th, and it's already got, I think, over 600,000 in backers, and their stretch goal was like 20,000. Wow. I did have one more adventure that I was wanting to run in 5e. In fact, I really didn't have any intention of leaving it, as I said, but I can't help but get excited about what I've heard about this new system so far. So I went ahead and got the alpha playlist. I've been absorbing myself in the channel and how the system works, and I did go ahead and back the Kickstarter because if anything else, I like the idea of at least supporting another game system. I want to start by going into the things that got me excited enough about this to leave 5e, and to clarify, I've been running 5e since it launched, and nothing else. The first thing I want to look at is the action point system. If you've ever played Divinity Original Sin 2, and if you haven't, please go remedy that, buy that game, it's amazing. But if you're familiar with Divinity Original Sin 2, this will be extremely familiar. And I bet it probably exists in other systems too that I just haven't heard of. But the way the action point system works is instead of predetermined set things that you can do on your turn, an action, a movement, a bonus action, a reaction, you really just get a pool of 4 options to do kind of at any time, anything. If you want to spend all of your AP moving, you can certainly do that, and then that gives you so much greater range. The only problem is, if you spend them all on movement, you don't really get to attack. So it's a trade-off of determining where you're going to fit tactically and what you're going to do. If you want to, you can spend all 4 action points doing an attack and actually gain a significant advantage doing so, but it means you can't move and you're stuck in a stationary spot. And when all the enemies and other players on the battlefield have the same freedom of movement, it suddenly matters if you move around a bunch. I'm sure other DMs can contest to this, but all of my D&D combat tends to revolve around characters just standing in one spot and saying, I swing my sword, over and over. And unfortunately, the enemies have a bad habit of doing the same thing, though that's on me. The reality is that I'm hopeful that this action point system will actually encourage much more interplay between characters, since even though there is an initiative order, it won't be set in stone, and they can more freely take actions and determine among themselves what they want to do. It also gives the same freedom to the enemies as well. This means that I can have enemies taking reactions or moving around or fitting themselves in better positions and not feeling constrained. It also means I don't have to feel that weird little guilty feeling that I feel every time I don't take a movement, because the reality is in D&D 5e, when I don't take a movement, it's probably because I don't actually want to move, but I also feel like I wasted half my turn. The next thing that I'm excited about is the dual defense system. In Divinity Original Sin 2, you have physical defense and magical defense. When you do physical or magical attacks, it wears down those different defenses. And what that allows you to do is build different party-based compositions, not individual character compositions. For example, when I play that game, I focus all of my characters on physical defense, and this makes me really effective at wearing enemies down, but it also makes me kind of ineffective against tanks, because if I had a more balanced party, I could target magical attacks against magically weak enemies and physical attacks against physically weak enemies. To me, this just makes a ton of sense, and so seeing it incorporated into a TRPG immediately grabbed my attention. And if there are other systems out there that do things like this, because I'm sure they're borrowed from something, that's fine. I probably just haven't heard of those TTRPGs, or they probably had something else attached to them that I didn't like enough. The next thing I want to mention is independent skill choice. One thing that did bug me about 5e, but I kind of just let it ride because I don't use nearly enough different skill checks in my games, bad habit, is being able to choose what skills you level up in by putting points in those skills. For example, if I want to play an intelligence fighter or a more martially oriented spellcaster, or a spellcaster who isn't necessarily automatically good at Arcana, but actually good at Persuasion that's not a bard, or any combination thereof, really. I just like the idea that I can make my character good at, say, Persuasion, or not good at Persuasion on my choice of what I want that character to be, not necessarily what class they're playing. The next thing that I'm super excited about are skill challenges. Basically, this little mechanic that is set in place in DC20 that's very multi-purpose for a variety of things. It's kind of the not too hot, not too cold, right in the middle sweet spot of getting rolls on the table, being able to use the dice that we all bought and love, but not getting all the way involved into full-on combat. So you could use combat skill challenges, but you also can use them for exploration and other things. For more details on the skill challenges part, I would just check out the coach. In fact, if anything I say sounds exciting, I would just check out the dungeon coach and all of his videos going into more detail on the DC20 system specifically. But again, what gets me excited about these skill challenges is that I have something that incorporates roles so that we're not just sitting there talking. I have players who actually want to use their dice. It's what we're there to do. But simultaneously, it doesn't devolve all the way down into initiative and combat and that kind of stuff. It's a little bit more beefy than just making one skill check roll for one character. It's more interactive for all the people at the table, but it's also quick and fast and gets things over quickly. Two things that I will mention that I'm less excited about and will probably end up just working around when it comes to my table is actually the ancestry system. Now, on the one hand, I'm super excited about the ancestry system, although as much as I'm aware, it's not exactly unique. I've heard about a system like this before. The idea is that you have a list of various races with traits, and you sort of buffet table shop around what traits you want from which race, and then it's up to you to come up with the backstory or such of how those two things came together. And you typically get two parents, so you can choose from a list of, say, elf traits, dwarf traits, human traits. Usually there's a beast, usually there's some sort of dragon-esque one, and usually there's an angelic one and a demon one, and you kind of pick two of those to be your parent, and then you pick a trait from each of those. I've actually seen a supplement book do something very similar to this for 5e. The only thing that I consider kind of a downside, or something that does need more work on this, is that there's basically no benefit, no real mechanical benefit for choosing just one race, for being all elf or all dwarf. Now, on his channel, Dungeon Coach actually does bring this up, but the answer that he gives to me just really isn't worth it. Basically, his answer is that you get a pool of points or a pool of traits, and you get to choose what traits you want from two different ancestries. And his solution for if you want to choose a mono ancestry is just that you get to keep points in reserve and spend them later. But his description of this involves spending them in other ancestries. Now, he says that you don't have to roleplay those ancestries. You could just pick a trait from another race and totally have your character not be from that race, which is fine at certain tables, but I don't think I'm going to go with that at my table. I'd really like to keep people in the vein of, if you pick traits from a dwarf, then that means that you're part dwarf, and I would like to hear your story of how or why you're part or full dwarf. The reason being is because the ancestry system just strikes me as way too much of an open board, open buffet. For a lot of tables, that's probably really great, and I'm glad the system is designed that way so that it's on me as a DM to either be super open with it or be a little bit more closed down with it. I find that creativity flourishes when given parameters. So I like to keep a little bit more strict on the ancestry part because I'd like to set up stricter parameters that gives my players a bit of creative guidelines. My players in particular would benefit from that. The other thing, and this is so minor, it's barely worth mentioning, but I'm going to mention it, is the fact that the attribute point, if it's called agility rather than dexterity. I don't know why, but this just really doesn't sit in my head quite right. There are so many other things in the system that borrow from 5e that I'm not entirely sure it's some sort of copyright-esque OGL type thing. Maybe it is, but at my table, I'm probably always just going to refer to it as dexterity. It even has the word dexterity in the description for the ability. I don't know. The nostalgic D&D fan in me just really kind of wished that that would have just been called dexterity, because that's really all it is. The last thing that I'll mention here, and something that I am truly really excited about, is the mana point system. I don't have the gripes with spell slots that Dungeon Coach does, but I do understand where he's coming from, and it is awfully confusing. I found myself introducing new players to the hobby quite frequently, and spell slots is never easy and always takes a really long time to describe. It also kind of burns in session 0 when I have a spellcaster at my table, because they end up getting all of the attention during the session 0 when I'm helping them build. Usually the martial classes are so overly simplistic that they've already got everything figured out, and they're just waiting for the spellcaster to finish listening to me explaining how wisdom is different from intelligence, how spell slots work, and the difference between prepared spells, non-prepared spells, etc. The mana point system is just so much more intuitive and also really easy to explain to new people. I really think it's kind of the best of both worlds, and also just makes spellcasting really dynamic. I'm really looking forward to that part specifically. It does make things a little bit more confusing for me when trying to explain or wrap my head around the difference between a wizard and a sorcerer, because at the end of the day, mechanically, it feels like they're still kind of just the same thing when you boil it all down to mana points. But even still, I kind of feel like it's an improvement. Now, I've had my ear to the ground for a while, kind of learning here and there about various systems. I learned a little bit about DCC. I learned about the Cypher system from Seraphis, the Procrastinating Pirate. Go check out his channel here. And I've also heard about other things. Of course, I've had Pathfinder rubbed in my face quite aggressively, to the point that I never even looked at the system. For all I know, half of these things come from Pathfinder, but I never bothered with Pathfinder because the fans of it have been so, shall we say, less nice about their enthusiasm for that system, to the point where it actually turned me off of it. So if you're a Pathfinder fan, I'm sorry, but I've had way too many bad encounters with Pathfinder fans. And that being said, I never saw the reason to move to a new system. Absolutely zero reason. I've heard people say that you can't do, quote, anything in 5e, and you, quote, need, unquote, systems for certain things in 5e, but my experience and for my table, that just has not been true. There's nothing that my players wanted to do that I couldn't make possible in 5e, and pretty easily, I might add. I don't know if that's just because I've been doing it for so long, or we do so much homebrew-y-esque stuff. I'm not sure. But the reality is that even though other systems are cool, and I'm sure they're a lot of fun, they just haven't been worth it for me. There's been no real incentive to move to a new system. Kind of like window shopping. Oh yeah, that sounds cool. Yeah, that'd be neat. Anyways, what's for lunch? When I first heard about DC20, I thought, okay, alright, I'll bite. You sold me enough to at least go to the channel and watch a video on it. And then I watched another, and another, and another. And the next thing I know, I found myself already pressing the checkout button on the Kickstarter page. So I can't wait for the Kickstarter to end. I'm super excited about it. And after spending some more time absorbing it and playing around with it, I probably will definitely make a follow-up video going into more detail about how it's gone for me and my table thus far. I hope you enjoyed, and if it sounds like anything neat to you, just go check out the Dungeon Coach. Check out for the system for yourself and see if it's something that you like or not.